Welcome to another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. I'm Nash, and along with fight dietitian Jordan Sullivan, we're going to be doing a series of podcasts where we'll be delving into the specifics of endurance nutrition and educating you on how to optimize your performance by fueling adequately for the work required. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about energy requirements for endurance athletes, expanding on some of those key fueling principles, and breaking down pre, during, and post-training nutrition. Let's get to it. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. It's Lauren Nash, the expert dietitian, and I'm joined by the fight dietitian himself, Geordie Sullivan. Hey Geordie.
Hey Loz, that was a good intro. I put Loz on the spot and we were mid-combo and I just started recording. She did pretty well there.
I reckon my new motto for life, honestly, is just wing it, hey.
Yeah, just wing it. That's good. I like that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me on your own podcast series. Pretty much what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be expanding on our first little prequel episode that we did a few weeks back on endurance nutrition. So on that first episode, if you listen to it, we'll give you a bit of a refresher. If you didn't listen to it, we'll tell you what it was about so you can go back and listen to it. But pretty much we just introduce you to two of our key nutrition principles for endurance training, super simple things that you can implement into your training to kickstart your endurance nutrition kind of journey. So pretty much that was training your gut and also getting on top of your hydration. So pretty much what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks is just delving into the specifics of endurance nutrition and educating you on how to optimize your performance by fueling adequately. Because, you know, if you're doing endurance sports, you probably understand, you know, the demands are pretty significant, you know, compared to any other type of sport. You're not just in the gym for 30 minutes, you know, you're on a bike for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. And then also jumping off that bike and going for a run. So nutritional requirements for endurance athletes are super niche. And yeah, I guess that's what we're going to be exploring throughout the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's a cool one. And I like that the plan that we were going to talk about and preface all this and talk about, it's important to know this because I see this so much in practice. I've done it myself. I see it with my clients. I see it when I'm out on the trails or out running or I'm riding my bike when people stuff this up. And you can always tell like, oh yeah, that's a nutrition issue. Like when someone's throwing up on the side of the trail or someone's on their bike and you can just see it in their face and they're like coughing and like and holding things back. Because like, as Lauren said, it is a really niche area, but it's so important. So many other sports, you definitely have to have your nutrition dialed in. Don't get me wrong. If you're a soccer player, you're a rugby player, whatever, like you do need to have your nutrition dialed in. But when you're out there and you're training for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever hours, you really have to get this because you feel it. Like, and I've had so many examples and I started taking this seriously probably 18 months ago. And in that time, I've experienced the whole host of it all. You know, I've been excessively dehydrated to the point where I had to go get an IV drip afterwards. I was that bad on my hydration after this run that I did. I had to go get an IV. I've had it to the point where I've thrown up, where I've just completely put too much stuff in and my gut was just not good with it, trying to hit certain numbers, not knowing limits, throwing up. I've done it where I've like crapped myself, like running and had to like race to toilets. I've done it where I've peed too much because I haven't got my electrolyte balance right. And I'm just peeing constantly, so dehydrating and stopping and always pulling over. It happens. And I think if you don't take this stuff seriously and you don't figure out how it works for yourself, you're going to constantly be hitting those hurdles. The good thing is though, is once you know this knowledge and you understand it and you've got a good grasp on it, it's really fun. Like it is quite fun going out there and then putting these into practice because you see immediate benefit. Like if you get your pre-race hydration and fueling on point, even pre-training, you feel that benefit straight away in that training session. If you get your first pit stop nutrition good, you go for 2-3 hours or whatever it is, and then you hydrate and then you fuel up and then you keep going, it makes a marked difference in how you feel. So that's what we want to go through. We'll educate you guys on what are the principles behind it, what are the theories, what are our experiences with it, and we'll go through it all. And I'll throw it over to Loz to kick it off.
Yeah, no, that was good. And I think throughout this series, Geordie, we can kind of tap into some of those awful experiences because I'm sure there'll be many people listening that are like, oh my gosh, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. And, you know, even the other night I was watching that like sub 7, sub 8, the stream. And one of the commentators actually made a really good point. And they said that nutrition is the fourth discipline of an Ironman event. And honestly, I was like, you are so correct. Like you could train as hard as you want physically. Obviously, conditioning is a huge side of things. But, you know, if you don't get your nutrition right, obviously you'd have to battle all those additional factors that you just mentioned. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited for this series. But I guess today we're just going to do a pretty brief episode, but we're going to be talking about, you know, energy requirements for endurance sports. I'm kind of just expanding on some of those key fueling principles that we started talking about in the first ep, and also just break down some pre, during, and post-training nutrition because ultimately, you know, sports nutrition as a whole, yes, we got your gels, your bars, all those types of things. But they're the things that we're having before, during, and after training. You know, at the end of the day, we still have a nice balanced diet for an athlete. So it's not all about the gels as an endurance athlete. So yeah, going to be talking about some brief, good intro, I reckon, into endurance nutrition.
Yeah, I think let's get into it, because this first topic is something that I experienced. And I guess like my background in combat sports, don't get me wrong, like you eat well, but a lot of the times you're in a deficit, right? Because you're always cutting weight. And I think this was one of the biggest things that I had to wrap my head around, is just how much energy you needed when you were doing this type of training.
Absolutely. And even I'm only just getting into this stuff, so, you know, I'm still doing pretty small sessions, but it's the same with CrossFit. You know, coming from a different sport into a sport like CrossFit or endurance, like where you really need to focus on fueling, it's totally different mindset. And you'd probably come from that, you know, weight-centered mindset. And now it's like, you know what, like the main nutritional goal for an endurance athlete is meeting your energy demands, which, depending on how much you're training, can be like twofold to like a normal individual.
Yeah, I think that's something that people don't appreciate, is just how many calories you burn doing this. And even people often think like, oh, if you're running, I hear a lot of runners say this, oh, you know, I'm just running, so I'm not burning that many calories. It's like, man, like on an hour run, you're going to burn probably more calories than what you are in a 30-minute HIIT session. Like there's only so much. The more that time goes on, especially if you're not super advanced or elite, and you can control your heart rate and your breathing and keep that like system really low, and your heart rate does get up there, you're probably in that orange zone, tipping towards the red zone for majority of that. And if you're going out for 60, 90, 2-hour run, that's a lot of calories that you're ripping through.
Yeah, and the thing with endurance training as well, you know, you've got those different sessions throughout the week. You might have like a short kind of a brick session, and then you've got those longer sessions. So it's like, okay, yes, within day kind of energy differences, but across the week as well, you really need to make sure that you're staying on top of your energy needs. And, you know, this isn't something that, you know, whoever's listening to this, we can't just say, okay, awesome, you're a 23-year-old female triathlete, you need X amount of calories. Like that's not how it works. We all know that, you know, energy intakes are highly individualized. You know, it depends on your height, your weight, your body composition, your training load, what are your goals. So, you know, that's not necessarily something we can just come at and say, okay, you need X, Y, and Z, but it's super important to be really aware of how much you're putting in, how much you're putting out. Obviously, you know, having a Garmin watch or whatever, those things aren't gospel. Like what they say, you know, isn't exactly how many calories you've burned. But if you're doing a session or two, like take a look at that and see just, you know, how much you really are burning through. And that'll kind of wake you up to be like, okay, holy dooly, am I actually eating enough to replace what I've been burning?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I used when I started was my recovery. And that's something a lot of people don't talk about. They talk about having energy for training and training, do this for training, and we'll do all this effort for training. But it's like, yeah, but you can only train as hard as you recover. And especially when you're doing this and you're out there and you're training for hours on end. If you're doing brick sessions, you could be out there for 6-7 hours, you know, you're biking, then you're running. Like it's a lot of impact on your body as well. And gauging how you recover is a really good measure on if you're getting enough calories. Like, don't get me wrong, like, especially when you start out, you should be sore and you should be adapting. But once you've got that basic fundamental calorie intake down pat, you will notice a significant difference. Like you'll sleep better, and then you'll get up. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you're magically not going to feel sore and not feel the effects of training, but it won't be such a slug. And when you start that second session, you know, you'll be like, okay, yeah, like I'm warming up. Once you're good, you'll be like, I'm good to go. And you notice the complete opposite when you're underfeeding yourself and you're not putting it in. Those sessions are so hard to get to. You never really seem to get out of second gear. They're just so much harder. And by the end of the week, your body is just completely fried. And that's one of the biggest things I tell all my clients is like, yeah, we can give you all these calories and everything and all these estimates. Just be in tune with your body and be in tune with your recovery and see how you're doing throughout the week, because that's going to be one of the best indicators. Are we hitting at that calorie amount that we need?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, what you were just describing in terms of slow recovery, not sleeping properly, they're all signs of something that we call low energy availability. And while this is actually a term that's kind of, you know, really hard to, you know, diagnose or identify in individuals, it's something that if you're aware of, you can kind of check in with yourself. And pretty much what energy availability is it's different to energy balance, where we talk about calories in, calories out. But energy availability is how much, you know, energy from food we have available to fuel our basic functions. So that's, you know, keeping us breathing, that's sleeping, that's recovering, our digestive function. So all of these things, the amount of energy we've got left after exercise to fuel all of that. So, you know, Geordie, where you're saying if you're not eating enough to recover, like if you're not putting enough fuel in for your body to be able to exercise and then maintain its normal processes, you're going to start to feel it. And, you know, symptoms of low energy availability, whether it's minor or major, can manifest in ways such as yes, like you mentioned, sleep disruptions, just feeling lethargic, feeling tired, taking a really long time to recover between sessions, or maybe if you're injured, you're taking longer than expected to recover. Decreased sex drive is a big one as well. Menstrual dysfunction in females, mood changes, all of these things can be kind of, if you're aware of them, can be like red flags, or like, oh, okay, I'm really not feeling like myself, or feeling a bit off, or I've plateaued in my training, I'm just not motivated to train. All of those things could be a sign that you're not actually eating enough to meet your needs, and you might need to kind of reassess, how much food you're putting in.
I think athletes have a bad habit of getting in this mindset of that training, I should be hurting all the time. At least with my background in combat sports, it was always less is more, and like you've got to run through the fires of hell to get to the gates of heaven type thing. Yeah. And it's absolutely not the case. An athlete shouldn't be thinking that. When you get your nutrition in line and you get your training in line, you get your volume right, and you're looking after your body, you're doing your mobility, you're getting your sleep in, you're doing your stress management, you're hydrating properly, you should be feeling really good. Like you should be in a good mood, like your testosterone, your libido, everything should be up. Like it is the best feeling in the world when you're training hard and you're fueling your body. Like you literally is night and day. Like you're a different person. Yes, you're training hard, you're sore, and like obviously you're going to be tired and sore from the training. But if you do these properly and you do fuel up and you're giving yourself enough calories and you're getting the right macros and you're doing all the other things, you should be feeling good. Like there's absolutely no reason why you should be feeling down and crappy and, oh, I'm overly sore, I can't get over this injury. You should be feeling really, really good.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, with endurance training, depending on what your load is like, you are going to be tired. Like that's normal, that's expected. But as you said, yeah, if you can get on top of your nutrition and that's fueling properly before, during, and after, and around the whole day, not just that pre-workout meal or just after, it's like a 365 day. I think, if you're always on top of your nutrition, okay, you might feel less shit, you might feel less tired. So yeah, I think it's super important. And also, that comes to rest days. It's like, okay, you get that mentality of like, okay, well, do I need to eat less on a rest day? But if you've got, that really kind of high variable training load throughout the week, chances are you're probably going to be in a maybe negative energy balance state. So by then reducing your energy intake on those rest days, even though you think in your head, okay, I'm moving less, I need to eat less, probably going to do yourself a disservice by actually reducing your energy intake, because to promote, muscle glycogen storage and synthesis, which is ultimately our fuel tank, we need to be in an adequate state of energy balance for that process to occur. And also with muscle protein synthesis, we need to have enough energy on board for these processes to keep working. So I think also, managing your food on your rest day as well. And if you're an endurance athlete or if you're a fit person, to be honest, a rest day, is it really a rest day? You're probably going for a walk still, or maybe a 5K run. So all those types of things are something to consider as well. If you're listening and you think, oh, kind of guilty of that. On those days I move less, I significantly eat less. And I guess, of course that comes back to your goals. But yeah, I think fueling properly around the clock is a big priority for our endurance athletes.
Yeah, especially if you're not in a weight loss phase or you're not trying to lose any weight, you're not doing, and we'll talk about in later episodes, like train low, compete high, and periodization principles and all of that. But if you're on a rest day, there's no reason you shouldn't be fueling up your body. I think, again, the mindset, and I had this exact mindset when I was a combat athlete, and I'm still a combat athlete, when I used to cut a lot of weight and I used to think, oh, I've got to get my calories down. It was like, okay, I'm going to use this day. I'm not doing much, so I've got to close that calorie differential. Now, completely different. If you're doing endurance exercise, especially when I know I've got to run 150 kilometers or something the next week, it's all about fueling your body up, one, recovering from that big training week that I just had, and getting my body in the best position possible so I can start that next training week in the best state possible.
Absolutely. No, that's really good. That's a really good outlook. And I think, of course, yeah, around the clock nutrition is important, but, maybe next we can talk about like pre, during and post nutrition for training. Because I think that's a super easy one that when done correctly can have a massive impact. So, we can just touch on those principles. What do you reckon?
Yeah, that's good. I think one thing we should mention, I know we're going to get this question, is like macros with it. And I think one thing I will say, and again, coming from my background, is like we all have this carb phobia. Most athletes do have this carb phobia, and there's a lot of debate. I get, and we'll get into this in later episodes, because I think there is merit in adding more fat into your diet, and the whole fat adaptation thing, I'll give my thoughts on in later episodes. One thing that has become abundantly clear to me from doing this is that if you want to be a successful athlete, if you want to continue to increase your training load, if you want to continue to keep recovering as best as you can and keep improving as an athlete, you need to have a good high carbohydrate diet doing this. And that's not me saying you need to be eating sugars and eating candy all the time and smashing whatever. but you do need to have a good high carb diet, and you need to have a good balanced diet. You need to be getting a good amount of protein. You need to be getting a good amount of fat, fiber, everything else. This world, I know people do it where they jump onto the fad diets, and some of them do keto and they go completely plant-based or whatever. Like, I feel that it would be very hard for the average person to do those things and do really well in this sport. It's be very hard to be a good endurance athlete and follow those very restrictive diets, because it's just so much load and so much work on your body, and you feel it. And it's the worst feeling ever when you're not hitting, especially your carbs. If you start, once you get up there, I feel like it's like an addiction type thing. Once you get up there and you realize how good you feel once you get these carbs and you glycogen like stock up, and then you go train, and then you go back and you fill everything up, and then you go to your second training session, you're like, whoa, I still feel really good. You feel so much different when you don't do that. Like, for whatever reason, you can't get access to all those foods. And I think that's an important point to make, because a lot of people, a lot of athletes come into this, whether they've come in from other sports or whatever, like I did, and they think, oh, maybe I don't need that much carbs. I've got to go get fat adapted or whatever. It's like, no, you absolutely need those carbs, and you need a lot of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am excited for those episodes where we talk about the train low, compete high principles and all the fat adaptation, because there is some really interesting science out there. But when you understand, like, the human's physiology and like how efficient our body is at using carbohydrates as fuel, it's super interesting, because obviously it's a huge metabolic shift in terms of like using fat as fuel. But that's definitely to say that fat plays a huge role in an endurance athlete's diet. And, you don't want to restrict that, but carbohydrates definitely a king. I feel like we sound like broken records because we always say it, but it's so true. And, even I guess just to give you guys, like a numerical kind of value on this, there's a lot of guidelines out there in terms of carbohydrate recommendations for athletes. And if you think, say, you train really low, you'd be wanting to get to that like 3 to 5 grams of carbs per kilogram of your body weight per day, which still is actually quite a lot of carbohydrates if you times that by your body weight. And then as we move up in intensities for training, so say, for example, maybe you train 1 hour a day, they recommend to have like 5 to 7 grams of carbohydrates, which again is actually quite a lot of carbs. If you put that into like how many slices of bread you would need to say, mate, 800 grams of carbohydrates or something, it's an insane amount. And then, we get up to like 8 to 12 grams per day for like those elite high level training athletes. And it does sound like a lot, but, like we'll get into it. And if you've listened to our podcast before talking about energy metabolism, our body can literally break down, the storage form of carbohydrates, which is glycogen. It's our body's primary source of fuel. And hence, to be able to fuel our session, like our body is our engine in these triathlon events, So it's super important to be putting that fuel in the tank. And we will get into that in terms of the fat carb. I think that'll be a really interesting episode.
Yeah, I think I've trained my body at least before big training days. And if I have like events on that I have to get ready for, I can get up to about 8-9 grams per kilo. And you feel the difference. Like, you really do feel the difference when you get that in for a couple of days and you glycogen load up, because I've done it where I just haven't done that, where I just haven't got those amounts in, and it's night and day. You feel so much better. It's just that first, not even the first part of the race. Obviously, you're going to be topping up your blood sugars as you're going throughout the race. And we're about to get in this with our pre-training and during talk, but having that high carb diet going into it, so much better. It's so much more beneficial. And really, when it comes down to it, everything we know in the research says that at this time, at least, if you've got a high carb diet, you're probably going to perform better than the guy that doesn't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, it's funny with all those fad diets as well. I personally just couldn't imagine being an endurance athlete and following a keto diet. Like, that just seems so hard to me. Even the mental side of knowing I don't have heaps of carbs on board, because to me, carbohydrates equals fuel.
Yeah. And it's like, we'll get into it, I'm sure, but I can kind of rationalize out the thinking of why people are like, okay, I want to get more fat adapted, but like, just training gets you more fat adapted. I think a lot of it comes, and this is why we want to do this series, is that there's so much misinformation or like half truths, because like becoming more fat adapted, it's not a bad thing. Like, that's what you're trying to do with training. That's the goal of endurance training. You want to spare glycogen as much as you can. How important is a like high fat diet for that? The research and what we know from the science, probably not as important as what we would think. The training itself is going to do that far more than what your diet is going to do. And we'll talk about all of that. But I think let's go into the pre-training. Let's finish off with that, go into pre-training, and then, maybe a little bit of during and post, and finish it off.
Yeah, for sure. Because on our next episode, we're going to really kind of delve deeply into that intra-training and intra-event nutrition, because it gets pretty confusing, with our carbohydrate timing, type of carbohydrates. So we're going to delve into that in the next one. So we'll kind of touch lightly, I reckon, on probably intra-training nutrition in this podcast, but I still think it's good to address all three at once. So I guess, pre-training nutrition, obviously what we're having immediately before our session, intra-training nutrition throughout our session, and then post-training nutrition, following our session or our event. So these are the 3 times we can really optimize our nutrition to support not only our performance, but our recovery.
Yeah, it's interesting. It definitely makes a big difference. Like I keep saying, pre-training I find is the one, and I continually experiment with this because a lot of people train in the mornings. I'm a big morning trainer. I get all my big sessions in the morning. How many people do you know that just wake up and go, I can't do it, I can't eat? And I think, like me and Loz spoke about on our last episode when we introduced this whole series, is that it's something you can train. It's like, if before we even get going and tell you this, and if we say any of this and you're like, wow, that sounds like way too much food. Yeah, it probably is. Like, to you right now, it probably is, but take it from someone who's done it. Like, who couldn't eat anything before I trained, and now I can eat quite a lot before I train. Is you can train your gut. Your gut will get better at it. It's just like anything else you do. If you go to the gym and do more biceps, you'll be able to lift heavier and your biceps will get bigger. If you train your gut to eat before working out, you will get better at it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think from that last podcast, you said just start at, say, 30 grams of carbs. That's enough to be able to kickstart. That could be like a muesli bar and a banana or something like that. I think you mentioned, get on MyFitnessPal or something and just try and get a visual idea of what that amount would look like. But pretty much, yeah, before training, obviously, yes, it does depend on time. How much time do you have before your session? Do you have maybe 2 to 4 hours? Okay, great. Get a big meal in. But for a lot of people, we know, that extra 15 minutes of sleep is sometimes a little bit more tempting than getting up with enough time to fuel properly. But pretty much in that window before training, you really want to focus on those simple, high glycemic index, high GI carbohydrates that are going to digest quickly and cause minimal upset to the gut, because you've had a few of those instances, Geordie, and I'm sure they're not very pleasant, are they?
Yeah, no, they're not at all. And yeah, I always say to people, if you are going to play around and do this, make sure with your running or your riding, swimming, I probably wouldn't recommend doing too much of this because you wouldn't want to do it in a pool. But if you're running or riding, make sure you've got toilets on your path, because if you do overdo it and you do overstep, which is all part of the learning process, I guess, but you will need to use that toilet pretty fast.
And again, reinstating why we always say don't try anything new on race day, because you don't want to have to experience that for the first time and shave off add on a couple of minutes because you were too busy in the loo.
Let alone the embarrassment of being that guy that's running off, and who knows, like in a mad rush, it can get pretty messy in there. But yeah, absolutely never, ever, ever try any of this first time on race day or competition day. And that's what we say, train your gut. You do it in training. This is what your training is for. Build this in, build your nutrition strategies into your training protocols. You got a big training session on Saturday, work up, like eat your big carbs throughout the days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, get ready for that and use these pre-training principles, practice it, because you do not want to try it for the first time race day.
Absolutely. So along with that high carbohydrate type of food, we want to be avoiding, your fats and your fiber. This is traditional pre-training advice. So you want to avoid the things that are going to sit in your stomach for longer than necessary and ultimately cause that gastro upset and prevent the rate of absorption and digestion as well, because we want those carbs to be able to release really quickly into the bloodstream, because it provides the glucose, which can then fuel our exercise. So ultimately, aiming, say if you want a number like 1 to 4 grams of carbs per kilogram of your body weight, it's a pretty great number to be able to get that really high carbohydrate portion in. And also you can have a moderate amount of protein as well, but ultimately we want to avoid fat and fiber. So that's your things like your peanut butter or your nuts or your seeds. I think this is probably a silly personal thing, but I love peanut butter with my breakfast. I don't know why, whether it's overnight wheat bix because I can't have oats, or toast or whatever. I love peanut butter at breakfast. And when I train in the morning, I can't have my peanut butter before training. So I reckon that's probably secretly something why I love training in the afternoon, because I can still have my peanut butter at breakfast. But I know for a fact, if my pre-training meal 1 isn't big enough, or 2, I've snuck some cheeky peanut butter in there or something, you do feel sick. And it's quite minor, but it's such a major impact on your training. And also making sure that you're starting adequately hydrated. I know we mentioned this on our last episode, but especially for those of you who wake up in the morning, first thing, you wake up dehydrated already. So just ensuring you're getting, whether that's say 600 mils of water or something, just kickstart that process so you're not already going into your session a little bit dried out.
Yeah, I think the hydration thing is really important. It's something I've been playing around with this and battling with so many different, because for me, I'm a big sweater. It's one of the biggest limiting factors in my performance when I go and train. I think when we think about performance, really what we're trying to do, like the goal of performance is you're trying to spare your glycogen, which we refer to as your fuel, which is all the stored like carbohydrates that we've got in our muscles that we're going to use when we're training. A good way to preserve them is to put in carbohydrates right before we work out, like Loz was talking about. You can put that in even 30 minutes. That's going to hit our bloodstream. Our muscles are going to preferentially use that before it hits the glycogen. The other thing you can do, if you do have a later training session, like we're talking about, pre-training, but you can get like a pre-training meal in 90 minutes, 2 hours before, and even try and get that in and top up those glycogen levels a little bit, and then even hit a snack before you go out. Like I do that a lot, where if you get up early enough, I have like a pretty intense warm up because I'm getting older, my hips are getting tight. So I have to do all this thing. It takes me about an hour and a half to do it. So I'll have like a proper meal. And then before I even get out, if I go out on the trails early, I'll hit a couple dates and I'll hit like a rice cake and banana right before, just to top up those blood sugar levels, even though I already had a meal beforehand, because I just want to top up. And then even before that, my strategy before and the day before was to make sure I have enough high carbohydrate foods to top up my muscle glycogen, because that's the point of training, right? You want to delay burning that glycogen so you can keep going for longer. And then the other big thing you need to worry about is, what's the other thing that's going to impair you is your hydration and overheating. So having good cooling strategies and making sure that you're not dehydrating so much to the point that your body just goes, nah, stuff this ain't happening. We're either too hot for anything to happen, or we don't have enough fluid for anything to happen. So just attacking those two things will make monumental differences. Get up. If you have the time, get a high carbohydrate meal, or even just get a high carbohydrate snack. Hit some, do you have to get electrolytes? Yes or no? Depends on what you're doing. Depends how far you're going. Have some water at least. Make sure, because like Loz said, you just slept for hopefully 8 hours, hopefully longer. I'm pretty sure not too many people get up and phantom pee throughout the night or consistently throughout the night. You're dehydrating throughout the night. You're not drinking anything. You get up, you're going to be dehydrated. Get your body back to a state of hydration, put those carbs, and that's going to put you in the best position then. Whatever that training session is, you're probably going to respond and adapt to it in the best way possible.
Absolutely. No, that was perfect summary of how important pre-training nutrition is. And I guess that leads into, intra-training nutrition. You mentioned we're trying to kind of minimize as much, sparring about muscle glycogen stores. And by doing that, it's always ensuring we've got what they call exogenous carbohydrates, which is from food. So that's the stuff that's, circulating in your blood so that your body can use that as energy, as opposed to trying to tap into these glycogen stores that, if you're doing an Ironman event, you've got hours and hours and hours. We want to try and prolong that process for as long as possible. So as I mentioned, we're going to kind of go into this in a bit more detail on the next podcast, because it is super informative. And I think a lot of people will be able to take away a bit more of like a nutritional kind of goal and like a strategy to have during their event. But again, during training, we have the same principles. You want to be going for those high carbs, low fat, low fiber. And also, if you're doing endurance, pretty much you're going to be doing a session that's 90 minutes or longer. And that's when we really want to start considering intra-training carbohydrates, so that we can continue fueling our body and providing that glucose for our muscles to use, as opposed to tapping into that process. Again, electrolytes and fluids. So I think it's pretty similar to our pre-training nutrition. I guess the kind of method of delivery often changes, because whilst we're exercising, we're also trying to run, trying to ride. I personally don't know anyone that's eating while swimming, but that would be interesting. I guess maybe have a sip at the end of the lap while you're training, but during an event, pretty much you don't really fuel during your swim events, unless you're doing one of those super ultra, what is it, like an ultra Ironman or something? They swim for like 10Ks.
Yeah, those guys eat. They stop. They have spotters or that go with them, and then they just float and eat, which is interesting to see when you see it actually. Yeah, literally.
So yeah, I guess with endurance, in the middle, we're kind of getting our food primarily then from gels or from, carb powders, from liquids, whatever method of delivery is most comfortable for you. Some people love gels, they're easy. Some people get super sick of that texture, that consistency after a long time. So you can do things like your pretzels, like your muesli bars, Cliff bars, making little sandwiches. One of my friends apparently used to have like potatoes. Yeah, honestly, if you prefer food over gels, go for it. But again, we'll talk about it in the next one, but it's like, should you be going for 30 grams an hour? Should you be aiming for 60 grams an hour? What does that look like across the hour? Obviously, you're not going to shove 60 grams in your mouth at once. You could do that strategically, breaking it up, say how many grams do you want to have per 20 minutes or per 10 minutes or something like that, because we want to try and optimize our body's efficiency at using those carbohydrates, which we'll talk about in the next ep. But anything else you kind of want to touch on today with intra-training nutrition?
Yeah, we'll get into it a lot more, because that's super interesting. Especially as an athlete, it's interesting to know, like, I personally don't like gels. I've experimented with a lot of them. I experimented with a lot of like sports subs, and I just feel better with food. And like, I will eat potatoes and things like that when I go out. And it's just, but it's interesting because everyone's so different, but it's cool because it doesn't really matter what you pick and choose. As long as you understand the principles, you can make it work. And then it's the fun game of, okay, what works for my body? And I think one of the other things that's really cool, and unless you go in and do it, and I think if you're just reading textbooks, you won't appreciate, like Loz said, is like, there's a logistical practice of like running and eating and then maintaining your breath, especially if you're like going for pace and you're doing decent times. Riding is even like, that's a skill in itself, being able to reach for your bottle, like get a gel, crack it open. And like, you have to be pretty good. Like, especially if you're a beginner and like a novice, that can be very difficult. I've seen a lot of people stack their bikes, like drinking water and what. Yeah. And so it's like, it's a real thing. And even getting that right is really, can be tough at times, but again, it's something that you want to practice in your training. The sooner you start practicing it, the better. But I think we'll go into it more depth, because once you understand the principles, it makes those food choices a bit better. And you can go, oh, okay, I can understand why people do Cliff Bar, and then they do also apricot bites, and then they do this or that. And so we'll hold off talking about that too much until we get into the nerdy science of it next episode.
Yeah, and that's fun. It is. There is a lot of nerdy science in endurance sport, and it's fun. But also, then it's like, okay, how does this translate into the practical world?
Yeah, and that's a big one, right? Like, I think you can listen to all of this, but at the end of the day, go out and try it. Like, at the end of the day, your body's so unique to you, and what works for me and Loz is a high chance. Maybe it will work for you, but high chance it won't. And you got to go out and you got to experiment and you got to figure out. And the only time to experiment is during your training. Like I said, do not do experiments on race day.
100%. Well, I guess that brings us to, post-training nutrition. And again, depending on your training load, you're probably training twice a day. And what's super important, obviously, post-training nutrition is important regardless, but even more so if you are training 2 sessions a day, because you go into that first session and you kind of say this is your glycogen like tank or whatever, you're depleted. So you use some of that energy. And then if you don't properly replace that come the second session, you're already starting that second session in a depleted state. So you're kind of, setting yourself off on the wrong foot by not properly kind of filling up your energy reserves. So we always, all the bros like, yeah, got to get my protein shake in. Obviously, kind of bro science is very different to endurance science, and protein 100% has an important place in post-training nutrition. We want to aim for a really good serve of like high biological value protein. So that's, whether that's your meat or like your whey protein, like your vegan blend proteins. You want to get a really good source of protein, but again, carbohydrates are super important for post-training in endurance athletes, because as I just mentioned at the start, if you don't replenish your glycogen stores, so replenish your energy reserves, you're going to go into that second session already depleted.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand what your priorities are. Like, do you have another session? If you do have another session and your priority is that, yeah, okay, I do want to do as best as I can in that session, then yeah, you need to get those glycogen stores up. If you don't have another session and you're just doing like one a day and you train early like I do, and by 6 a.m. you're all done, and then you're not training until 4 or 5 a.m. the next day, then you know what, you probably get those out throughout the day, space it out. But if you are training for an event, it's likely you're going to be training 2-3 times a day. And that's a lot of sessions. That's a lot of carbs and a lot of energy you've got to burn through. So really dialing in your post-training nutrition between your sessions is going to be really important, not only for the quality of your sessions, but your overall recovery once you finish that day. Okay, can I recover in that 8-9 hours when I'm sleeping? And then when I get up, is my body good? It's never going to be completely fresh. Like, you're meant to train, you're meant to be sore, you're meant to adapt to training, but is it in the best spot possible so I can keep adapting the next day? And that's where your post-training nutrition becomes so important.
For sure. And I think, a lot of people stress about timing. Something still I get asked so many times is, oh my gosh, like, is it essential that I eat within like 20 minutes after my workout? Obviously, of course, I understand that mentality. And yes, our muscles are, primed, so to speak, to have increased uptake of nutrients after exercise. However, our bodies are responsive, within that 24 to 48 hours after exercise. It's not just that immediate 30 minutes. Our body's like, okay, cool, like finished, I'm going to go catabolic now, or whatever everyone's mentality is. It's like, yes, of course, like you said, if you are training later in the day, like your priority is quite immediate, but you've got the whole day to kind of recover as well. So I think people always place a lot of emphasis in that, 20-30 minutes. And of course, but also I think for me, the longer I put off my post-training nutrition, the hungrier I get later in the day as well. So it's just kind of, nipping that in the butt as early as possible as well.
Yeah, I've had experiences with that with clients where it's like they've been obsessed with getting this like feeding window opportunity, and they're just obsessed with getting food in there. and they'll finish training and then they'll just force feed food in and then they'll just feel terrible, but then that'll impact the food that they eat later in the day. And it's just like, man, why don't you just wait until your stomach feels good and you feel good and then just eat that food? And so we don't stuff up the rest of the session, like the rest of the food you need to get in, that's going to eventually like fuel that session, because they're just stuffing up later sessions by just shoving food in, feeling terrible, then not eating the rest of the day and then going in depleted into the later sessions. Like, man, you just completely missed the point here. So I think understanding that there isn't that crazy need, it's just about your priorities. What do you have going on? How does your body feel? How do we plan around what you have on for the rest of the day?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, yeah, carbs and protein are a match made in heaven, because they're, having protein with your carbs is going to increase how efficient your body is at actually storing that muscle glycogen as well. But of course, carbs, protein, yeah, great. Again, hydration, we want to start off our session hydrated. It's inevitable that during our training session, we're going to lose fluids, but it's super important to make sure you're replenishing as much as you can after a session. And I think, like you're really good at talking about, hydration and everything, but a good way you can actually kind of get a gauge of how much fluid you're losing is, weigh yourself before session. Like, just kind of take a note, okay, whatever, you weigh 70 kilos, you go out and you do your session. Also take into account how much you're drinking. Like, okay, if you've got 2 1 liter water bottles on your bike or something, but then weigh yourself after that session, and whatever that difference is, you want to try and replace it by 150%. And that's going to get your hydration levels back up to the top. And that also, doing that in training, I think it kind of helps to paint a picture as well of what you can expect to lose during an event. Because, obviously for an event, say if you're doing like a 70.3 or something, you're not going to, like, that's an extreme, like an extended amount of time. And during training, you're not probably going to be doing that. But it helps you to kind of realize, holy crap, I'm losing, say, 2 liters, 3 liters, 4 liters of water. It just helps you think, okay, this is how much I should be trying to aim to replace. You can never match your losses, but during training, if you can try and replace, that's really the goal here.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, and it's because it's so individual, right? And people have such individual responses to certain levels of dehydration. Like, some people get to 2% dehydration, they feel terrible. Some people can go to 5, 6 and feel great. There's world records in the marathon that show people being 10% dehydrated. So it's all figuring out, how does this work for your body? Like, me personally, when I'm training, if I slip up on my hydration, that is the first thing. Like, I can mentally push through a lot of things, and like, I don't really care if I hit the wall and I'm glycogen depleted. Like, I can push through that pain. If I snap my knee or whatever, my hip goes, I can get through that. The one thing I really struggle with is dehydration. If I hit a certain point, it's really, really hard mentally to get, and physically it's just so hard on the body. But you need to, again, like we keep saying it, you need to practice this. You need to figure this out for yourself. Weigh yourself before your session, weigh yourself after. Get familiar with how much you lose at different types of sessions. If you're doing a tempo run, how much do you generally lose per hour doing that? If you're doing a run outside in the trails, how much do you generally lose doing that? If you're doing an indoor treadmill run, get a gauge of what your sweat rate is. And then I think it's also important to appreciate that you need to understand what happens to your sweat rate as you go on, especially if you're doing longer, like ultra endurance events. Your sweat rate is going to slow down. And then a lot of people make the mistake of putting in far too much fluid, and that can be a problem. But work with someone and figure it out. Like, you can train these things. Like, okay, how much did I lose when I did this 1 hour session? And then how much did I lose when I did a very similar session, but I did it for 4 hours? And you can get a good gauge of how your fluids needs will change throughout that. And then we'll obviously get into this a lot more. And then obviously getting the right amount of electrolytes in, and then pairing that with your liquid carbohydrates is very, very important. But again, we keep saying this, practice it in training. Like, when you've got these sessions, weigh yourself before, weigh yourself after. Okay. And then see how you feel putting that much in afterwards, and then have a go at just putting in, say, 30 mils, 50 mils every 10 minutes, whatever you're comfortable with starting, and then slowly build it up. Again, it's going to feel uncomfortable when you start, but you will get better at it.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't know if it's just us because we're dietitians, we think all this stuff is cool, but I just think as an athlete, like, how great is it that you can be aware of all this stuff and know, okay, what makes me go hard and like what makes me go super fast. So it's like having that really awareness of your nutritional needs can have a massive impact, and, just increase your confidence and like, yeah, okay, I'm going to put this in, I'm probably gonna have a really good session. So it's like all these things that come together to try and help alongside your training. Obviously the physical conditioning is super important, but nutrition, they go hand in hand.
Yeah, and something I always say to people is, like, on the other hand, you don't have to care about it. Like, you don't have to give 2 shits about all this. Like, if your goal is just to go out there and you just want to run a marathon and just get through it, like, power to you. Like, just go train, do whatever, and just, like, who cares about it? But if you are serious about an athlete, if you are serious about becoming better every single day, and you want to be competitive when you go out and do that race, and even if you're competing with yourself, you want to smash your time, you want to keep improving, there's no ifs or buts. There's no questions. Like, you have to take this seriously. You have to do it. There's just no way, especially in endurance sport, where the top guys and the guys you'll be racing against all will have theirs dialed in. There's just no way you can compete and no way you can keep getting better unless you have this stuff dialed in.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point. And I reckon we'll probably wrap this first episode up on that one. So pretty much pre, during, post-training nutrition at nighttime, nutrition in the day. If you want to get that level up, I think dialing that in is super important. And I guess as we go on, I think our next one, we're probably going to be really delving into training nutrition. So getting your carbohydrate intake on point during your event, and also carbohydrate loading leading up to the event as well. So that's probably what we're going to talk about on our next potty. But you have any final words?
No, that was a good one. I'm just flicking through the notes for the next one, and this looks really cool, actually. This is kind of something I wish I knew before I started doing endurance training. So I am very, very interested and very excited to talk about this one. So let's wrap this one up there, Loz. Another good episode. Cheers for that.
Awesome. Cheers, Geordie.